I'm Othalia Larue. I work as a research scientist at Parallax Advanced Research. It's a research institute in beautiful Dayton, Ohio. I'm also a graduate of the Cognitive Computer Science program. I'm Pierre's academic baby. And I'm going to be talking about cognitive models of information effects. And I wanted to kind of situate what I was going to talk about a bit in the days that we've already had. And you're going to see during my presentation actually that a lot of my models are inspired by dual process theories. So it's going to be aligning a bit with what we had on day one with guests that we had, so Pim Dennis, also Ruth Byrne. And I'm also going to be talking about metacognitive judgments and feeling of rightness. So we're going to go back a bit to what Valerie Thompson was talking about. And finally, I'm going to be talking about misinformation in my final model. So there's going to be actually some results that Gordon Pennycook had, I think. I have a tendency to have my model kind of turn around dual process theories, specifically the tripartite framework. And everything I'm going to be presenting today, it's works that I've done in collaboration with Dr. Alex Heff, who was first with me at Wright State University and is now working at the Air Force Research Lab. And so the first model, I'm going to be presenting three models. The first model I'm going to be presenting is this cognitive model of switching between reflective and reactive decision-making in the ways and tasks that you also saw at the beginning of the week during Sarah's presentation. So Stanovich tripartite framework, you have the ideas that your reflective mind and your algorithmic mind would be those type 2 processes that are more analytical. The algorithmic mind is the one capable of starting the cognitive decoupling. So we're going to be seeing a bit of that with the ways and task. Then I'm going to be showing a core-affect model of decision-making in simple and complex environments. And so that will be playing a bit on affect heuristics that I would place at the level of the autonomous mind, but also the interaction with cognitive control and the algorithmic mind. And then the final model I'm going to be showing is really modeling the continued influence effect. So how we use that effect that is involved in trying to give misinformation, so disinformation to people, by kind of hacking the affect by presenting information that potentially has more affect valence, or playing on when the information is presented to have this information linger. And so I'm working in the ACTAR cognitive architecture, so adaptive control of thought, and then the rational was added to kind of aim at the idea of ecological rationality. And so again, those definition you saw this morning, it's both the unified theory of cognition and the software implementation. And I've put that link here because you can go on the website that's hosted by Carnegie Mellon University, and you can download the architecture and some tutorials so that you can use it yourself. And so it's composed of various modules. We've got our goal module where we put very like short-term goals. We have the imaginal, which is kind of what you would see as your working memory. And we have visual or manual and vocal module, which allow us to interact with the environment. And so in this architecture, you both have symbolic and subsymbolic structures. So symbolic, you've got procedural module, which is kind of a set of ifs and rules. And those rules in the procedural module are going to be able to manipulate your declarative memory elements here, which is composed of chunks. And so those two types of memories, your declarative memory is going to be your facts, your production in the procedural memory, it's going to be more your skills. And an add-on that I have for this presentation, so Julia was talking about the fact that we kind of iterate on those architecture and we're like, okay, that might be missing this, I'm going to add that, etc. And so people develop kind of modules that may or may not make it in the next iteration of the architecture. And so a module I've developed is a co-affect module, which is specifically to be used to describe how emotion mesh with other cognitive processes. And then why do I use ACTAR here? So ACTAR is cognitively plausible. It's architectures that there's been a lot of papers that have been done reproducing different type of psychological tasks. And so that has been validated for a lot of tasks on memory, for example. So simulating the time that it's going to take to retrieve an element, simulating the time that a procedure is going to take to run the competition between procedures, etc. And so it's a nice way to be able to predict and explain behavior. So first, this cognitive model of switching between reflective and reactive decision-making in the Weizen task. So we saw the Weizen task yesterday, so I'm not going to go deep in it because it always makes me nervous when there's people and I'm presenting that task. So we've got 4 cards, AD, 3, and 7. We're told there's a letter on one side, there's a number on the other side. And the rule is that if there is an A on one side of the card, then there is a 3 on the other side, and we're asked which card to turn over to invalidate the rule. And so an answer we get often is this A and 3, which is incorrect, because 3 would not invalidate the rule. Your correct one would be A and 7, because if you turn 7 and there was an A, then you would be invalidating. And another type of answer we can get is this incomplete answer of just the A. And so that A and 3 is kind of like the past answer people go for, and that happens very often. A and 7 is more, it's less present in the type of answer, and that's something even that happen in people who sometimes have had logical training. So it's a pretty robust effect. And so if you remember first week, Valerie Thompson actually presented this experiment with the dual response procedure. And so we ask people to provide a first answer, to tell us how they feel about that first answer. And then we tell them, well, do you want to change your answer? And Valerie Thompson has identified this feeling of rightness, which is kind of a degree of fluency with which that first answer is produced. And she's also noticed that when you have a high feeling of rightness on that answer, you have a tendency to not reconsider your answer, and the fastest you answer, the highest feeling of rightness rating is 2. And so what I wanted to do is kind of like get at that feeling of rightness, and that's where that co-affect mechanism I was talking about is gonna intervene. So co-affect theory, most phenomena attributed to emotions can be explained in more simple terms, that co-affect, without that need of emotion. And that co-affect is that state that is accessible to consciousness, but is not necessarily accessed. And it's more like feeling good or bad, positive or negative, and not yet to your emotion, conceptualized emotion. And underlying that, you have valence and arousal, which are 2 values. Your valence is going to be kind of more this negative positive aspect. Your arousal is going to be the intensity of the emotion. And so it's also kind of a dynamic state. So previous events are going to change the co-affect, and how you're encoding events that are actually happening right now is going to depend on a general average co-affect of the current episode. And so that's going to influence your memory that way. And so the way I add it in ACTAR, this is your general activation equations that you have in ACTAR. So elements of the declarative memory are going to have an activation which is going to be determined by this base level term, which reflect for recency and frequency of the chunk. So for example, if you use a chunk more frequently and more recently, it's going to be more activated than ones that's not used very often. And that's kind of how you forget things. If you don't use them or see them frequently, you might forget them. And there is also a retrieval threshold of what you can retrieve. So under a certain activation, you might not be able to retrieve that element. And that's how the memory is going to work. And so to this general equation, I added the terms of valuation and arousal. And your valuation is a valuation term. It's so reflecting, it's also connected to intrinsic reward in the system. So when you see the environment and you wanted a certain event to happen and it does not happen, that might be a negative reward. When it does happen, that might be a positive reward. And so your valuation is going to be computed with that. And your arousal is going to be an absolute value of your valuation, and both have some weights that are affected to it, that are separate. And so the way we model this feeling of rightness, we use to be able to compute kind of this internal fluency. We use the temporal cognition module, which is available in ACTAR, that allow kind of to estimate the time that has passed internally. And that's what we're going to use to basically compute this feeling of rightness. And so it's going to be that time required to complete the initial assessment when we were reading the text. So we're going to consider that you have a if heuristic in your procedural memory, which is like your reading if heuristics that kind of direct you when you're reading text. And you're like, okay, if A is in 3, okay, I'm encoding that, I'm retrieving it. How fast did I retrieve that? If I'm under a certain threshold that the answer I'm going to provide, if I'm above, well, maybe I'm going to think some more. And so to give you an idea of the type of memory representation you would have in ACTAR, that would be some chunks. And the way I did it, so each of those little table is a chunk. I'm representing the cards that I'm seeing. At first, they don't have a meaning associated to them. Eventually, they might get P, Q, not P. And I'm also representing, even though modus ponens and modus tollens are in fact going to be executed by the procedure, I am representing their structure in declarative memory this way. And so this way, the procedure that is applying those rules is going to be the same, but those two rules might not necessarily, the element of the rule might not have the same activation, which means that a rule might be called faster than the other. And so the cognitive decoupling, we kind of made it a certain way. It wasn't, the architecture wasn't built to have the cognitive decoupling. So we did this little hack of having a deco switch to 1 when we're in cognitive decoupling. And this way, when we retrieve the element of declarative memory, we tell I'm retrieving with decoupling 0 when I'm not in decoupling. I'm retrieving with decoupling 1 when I'm in decoupling. So that avoids to have some representation like digging into others. And we also had some exploratory rules, which were more those analytical rules, which are going to assign some meaning to the cards. So for example, here, assigning the P and the Q based on what was read. So logic rules involved in the cognitive decoupling. We had the modus ponens that will lead you, if you execute it, to retrieve A incomplete. If you don't execute it here in red, if you couldn't retrieve it from declarative memory, like you don't remember that you had modus ponens, that's going to fail and you're going to still have your A and 3. And then your modus tollens identifies your 7 as not Q, and then if you can retrieve modest tolerance, which has in people is less present, so less active, then you can apply it, but if you couldn't, well, you won't. And that's what made get you to the correct answer, AN7. Otherwise, you might have been like, I'm going to try to apply something else. I didn't retrieve it, and you're going to have your incomplete A. So that kind of shows you how even when you do this inner simulation or this analytical thinking, you might not have the full answer. And so if we look at the model as a full thing, first, I'm reading that text. I have my form heuristic structure where I'm retrieving AN3 because that's what I read, because that was in the wording. How much time did that take me to execute it? If I'm in the condition where I have time pressure, I answer. So here I answer if my feeling of rightness is not, if my feeling of rightness is high. I'm confusing people with my feeling of rightness inverse here. But if my feeling of rightness is high, answer. And I might decide to stop. So that's how I get the wrong answer. If my feeling of rightness is not high, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna engage in analytical thinking. That's how I'm starting a cognitive decoupling. I have a negative reward that is sent backward to kind of inhibit what I have thought about before, because I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go into that, and I populate my inner simulation with retrievals. So the system is gonna do open retrieval from the declarative memory, look at all the chunks. If those chunks are above a certain retrieval threshold, they're in my inner simulation. That means that I might try to remember all the cards, but not remember all the cards. So potentially, just because that inner simulation is not complete of the environment, I might not be able to apply the modus ponens because I don't have the element. So even if I had this, and that's what Stanovich is going to call the focal bias, bias or bias, anyhow. Even if I have all of that, I can still make a mistake. Otherwise might be able to apply my modus tolerance. Then can I retrieve the modus tolerance? Might be able to apply it, and then I have my correct answer. But that kind of gives you the area of the range of all the answer you can get to this task. And so you might wonder how there's differences between the different models. It's because we gave some training to people. So for example, we're like, okay, there might be some people, they went to a lot of logic classes. So we're gonna give them like some sort of impersonal logic training. And so we're gonna reinforce on the population some on multiple instances of actor agents that I have. So I'm saying I have 100 people and I have 100 little actor agents. I'm gonna kind of train them differently to give them some variety. Yeah. And so production compilation. So for example, the fact that when you are reading a text, your attention is kind of drawn to reading if something, then something. That's something that we trained in the architecture by making it read and read and read and read and read. And we had something which is called production compilation in actors that is activated. That's going to do that if you do something so many times, and maybe that was 2 rules that you had in your memory, all of a sudden it's going to like merge into 1 rule that's super fast, and you don't have to retrieve stuff from declarative memory. Kind of like, you learn to bike. You're not thinking about how you're biking or retrieving things. You're just doing it. So that we made the model do that by just showing him those rules and making him learn. Additional interesting result that I wasn't expecting is that when I was giving, because when you activate that, you activate it for the whole model. So the whole model potentially can do production compilation. An interesting result that we had is that some of the models started having a faster cognitive decoupling route because they had compiled some of the rules that are involved in the cognitive decoupling. So that could also explain that there's individual differences in the speed of cognitive decoupling in people. And that could also eventually, if we have like some data to test that, explain the idea of some of the results you have at the cognitive reflective task, at the active open-minded thinking. And so we compared to the human data, and that's a qualitative comparison because Valerie didn't have that data anymore. And so we compared and we were able to kind of reproduce qualitatively the answer changes, that relationship between the currency of fast to answer and the feeling of rightness. And also the relationship between the response time as you're engaging in more thinking, and something that's rare compared to other models. We were also able to explain why sometimes you have A and 7, and sometimes you have A, which is this incomplete answer, but which is still somewhat correct. So to summarize this one, so different type of reasoning, our A and 3 incorrect answer with a strong feeling of rightness, no cognitive decoupling. Like I was saying, correct but incomplete with weaker feeling of rightness, only partial model exponents and no modest tolerance. And then our complete correct answer, A and 7, when the feeling of rightness was weakened, we could apply everything. So kind of explaining individual differences in reasoning from those training procedures that we had, different instances of cognitive model, but also from the activation noise that we have in the architecture. That's something Julia talked about. So it's what allows some sort of exploitation in the architecture. So you're going to have, because of the activation noise, even so the retrieval was close to be able to retrieve, sometimes it's just going to fail because there's noise. And so limitation, no quantitative fit, elements left out. Julia talked about that a bit. It's really hard to make a cognitive architecture read things. So you have to go with your little hand and do a little knowledge engineering. I'm going to talk about other methods in the last models. Okay. So now the core affect model of decision making in simple and complex environment. So here we were reproducing an experiment that has been done by 2 researchers where it was looked a bit at the affect heuristic. And so the experiment is I killed it. You have your little humans, you show them 4 cars. Best choice has 75% positive attributes. 2 cars have 50% positive attributes. 1 car has 25% positive. And so you've got this simple environment and this complex environment, and people are shown both of them. And so your complex environment is just that you have more attributes, you have more features per car. And so the results that were shown, people were asked to be focused on their feeling or focused on the details of the task, and separated. And so the results that were shown were that when people were focused more on the details, they had a good performance in the simple environment. The feelings was a little bit less good. But when you switch to the complex environment, all of a sudden, the people that were focused on the detail were making a lot more mistakes than the people that were focused on the feeling. And so we were suggesting that it could be explained, and there's multiple explanations to this task. So there's this affect heuristic, could also be explained by the somatic markers by Damasio, but there's no mechanistic explanation. And so we were suggesting that that could be explained by the car affect again, and that when people are considering the option and being like positive, negative, and having it with their affect, that would accumulate to lead them to a decision that illustrated that emotion cognition interaction. But when they're in the complex environment, when they're doing the details aspect, all of a sudden it's going to kind of have a cognitive load on them because they have so many details to remember. And that's why when they're in the complex thing, being affect focused is better than being detailed focused. And so we tested that hypothesis with ACTAR. And so we've got this detail focus condition, and you can even like comparing. So that would be, those steps would be an equivalent of all the rules that I had in the model. And like even when you compare the rule you need to implement that, you notice that detail focus has a lot more rules. So that's kind of longer program to run for a person. And so our car feature value were displayed. We see the car, we encode the car. We see feature, we encode the feature. Value, same thing. We put that in declarative, so imaginal, which is your working memories, and we clear it. It goes in declarative memories, therefore it's reinforced. It's got more activation. You go back to that until you've like done all the cars. And then when you get the answer, you look into your memory, you're like, okay, I'm gonna pick a car that has not been detailed yet, and I'm gonna detail that. And I'm gonna retrieve like my good judgments, count the positives, and go back to 10 until I found all my cars. In the feeling focus, you're gonna see your car feature value. You see your car, you retrieve the car, you see the value, and you trigger a reward, an internal reward based on that was bad, that was good. Like you're like, okay, bad, good. And that's gonna internally in the system, you're not aware of that, but that's what happened in the system. That's gonna update evaluation. And you go back to 1 until you've done all the cars. And then when you're, even when you're answering, it's easier because you're just like, okay, what's the best car? And I'm gonna do it based on the feeling. You don't have to like think and count and etc. And so give an idea of the memory representation, detail focus, car shows up, put it in memory, put it in memory, put another car in memory, put my features, and that's how it goes. And I'm being asked, I'm gonna count all the properties. I'm retrieving car A, counting, car B, etc. When I'm feeling focused, I am gonna see that car A battery good. What happens is that the activation goes higher. Car B battery good, activation goes higher, etc. And so when I'm being asked, my activation is already higher. And so when I'm retrieving, that's the last thing on my memory just by the sake of activation. And so we were able to reproduce, there was 50 runs of the model. We were able to reproduce the two findings of the previous studies. So this difference in the accuracy of the feeling focus condition between simple and complex condition. And yeah, here, so detail focus complex here, and feeling focus complex here. So we were able to reproduce those differences, and we were, so that was highly significant for the feeling focus complex and the detail focus complex, and then just significant for the simple condition. And so how we can explain that is that because in the complex condition, detail focus, you remember more elements, which kind of increases your chances of having some retrieval failures. And that's why you have a poor performance. Important thing is that we couldn't account for, like, I'm looking at the car and like I'm car A, car B, and I like mismatch them when I was looking at them, which is something people do a little bit in the experiment. This we couldn't reproduce. And then for the feeling focus, the difference between the fact that like feeling focus is really good in the complex and not so much during the simple is because you have so many features in the complex conditions that's actually helping the feeling focus by making in your memory the activation between good and bad even more different, because you've got more occasions to reinforce that. Otherwise, the difference would be lower in the simple condition, and with some noise, you would have more chances of having some mistakes. So that's why actually that affect heuristic is more helpful in that complex environment. That's like an example of like good use of affect to simplify things in your environment. So yes, I was this one. So with the affect heuristic, and now I'm gonna go to something a bit more, I would say, a bit more actual as far as like the news you are reading right now, and that's kind of like more of a real world problem, even so like the studies that we're gonna look at is really in a laboratory. So that's a continued influence effect. We've done several papers about it, and if you want, you can actually download the models online, like the implemented model we have and the data we used. So the continued influence effect, it's this idea that when you're showed misinformation, even so afterwards you're shown a correction of that misinformation, there's a lasting effect of the misinformation. And so that's explained by multiple theories, which is also why it's interesting to use the cognitive architecture, because sometimes that allows you to look mechanistically at what is common between different theories and be able to integrate it. And so some of the explanations are that we have competing memory activations. And so the misinformation, because there's this effect that like it was shown one time and maybe your correction is gonna refer to the misinformation. You're just kind of doing some sort of recency frequency effect on the misinformation, and by trying to correct it on some people, you're actually reactivating the misinformation itself. And so that can lead to errors. Or there's some familiarity-based affect that the way the misinformation is worded, that's something that you're like, oh, yeah, that sounds like something that could happen. And so if detected, that's kind of what we saw earlier during the summer school. If detected, you can have some directed retrieval or some reasoning aspect where you inhibit it and you're able to like go through more processing and eventually correct it. But the continued influence effect is like a pretty robust effect. Another explanation is that people might have a preference for more complete and coherent mental models. And so when you present the correction, it's not a correction that is tailored and can be integrated. And that creates a feeling of discomfort that I myself would be is actually linked to the feeling of rightness. So like your correction is not like as good, doesn't feel as good as the misinformation itself. And that's something that touched directly on what Gordon Pennycook was showing basically these large language models were integrating their explanation to the mental model of the person so that the corrections that it was providing felt good. And then finally, there's a feeling aspect in misinformation because feeling influences memory. It's making it easier to recall, and you're gonna have noticed when you're online and you've got like some misinformation, it's gonna be like clickbait and go to that negative thing and that like short little thing, and then you're gonna remember that, and sometimes you're not even gonna click to see what is actually. And so we took an experiment from École and Antonio, and what's very interesting is just as a side note for students, all those are published on OSF, and you have like all the data of those experiments, and you have multiple style of those experiments that are done by multiple researchers that you can use like for your model or to do your own analysis. So that's very practical. And so typically those continued influence effect tasks, you're gonna have a narrative where first you're shown that misinformation and then you're shown a correction. And there's one article per narrative and separate sentences like that. So basically you're gonna run it on people, you're gonna have that football player won't be available for the opening match. Misinformation is that he tested positive for enhancing drugs. So like person who sees the misinformation in our group is gonna see that. So you're gonna have a group with misinformation, a group with misinformation and correction, and a group with no misinformation, no correction, just as a control. And another thing that's kind of varies in this experiment, it's also the sources for the different condition. So Oliver Lindgren here, if I remember correctly, it can be in one of the experiments, he's going to be the coach of the local football team. And another one is like going to be the minister of sport and something of, so it has to do with like trustworthiness and credibility of the person who's issuing the correction to. Yeah, so one thing we did here, and yeah, I was talking about the fact that it's very hard to give text to an architecture or maker produce text like in that kind of experiment. And so what we did with this one is that we connected it to a large language model to do the parsing of the text in a format that would work for Actar. So we basically did those tuples, and you don't see that, but like it's the list contain many food additive that includes serious risk, including cancer and ADHD. And so take that sentence, it's going to be translated like that by the LLM. The LLM wasn't perfect, so even so we didn't have to like do all of that by hand. We had to do a few corrections. We've made that better in the experiment we are doing right now. But it's still underway, but like that's a nice way to simplify a little that knowledge engineering piece. And then we used the NRC emoticon lexicon that is online to have valence and arousal for the different words that were in there. We're trying something now where we do sentiment analysis of the sentences. We haven't seen like what's the best yet. And so, yeah, first we parse the text into those word pairs. Then we have the valence and arousal here. We did two models, one with just the memory model and one with the memory model and the affect. And so model works that way. You find a word, you attend, you read, you create the association between those two words, and you retrieve the association, and that's how you kind of like read little by little your text. And then when you're asked to answer, so like in the experiment, they were asking people to give a summary of the text. What we did is for the scenario, we did an open retrieval, and like the most activated word were our summary of the text. And then we start answering. And this was just so that we were sure we could, first word we got, we were, okay, is it the end of a chain of a mental model or is it the beginning? So like, if it's food additive, do I go backward to get least? If it's, or do I go forward and get health risk, just to do our little like mental model of the text. And so the experiment, you had this one, so that was per scenario, you had a text, so the drug one was like there's a new drug that just got out, and there's a problem with it, etc. And so people were run per scenario, but they were also run then per source condition. So when I was telling you like there was so low expertise, low trustworthiness, that would be like the guy who's training the football team of like that little city. And high expertise, high trustworthiness, that would be like somebody from the government of that place. And what we did is, so in just the memory condition, we don't have surveillance and arousal at all. And in the affect condition, we have it. And we also use it to add credibility and trustworthiness to people. So if it's a high trustworthy person, that's gonna be someone who has a kind of positive reward and some sort of positive arousal, whereas when it's not somebody trustworthy, that's gonna be negative. So we were able to reproduce decently. So with that first, so model one is the one without the affect. And so the model two, the one that had the affect performed slightly better. But like you can see that we had some scenarios that we weren't able to get, like for example, this football scenario. And same thing for the trustworthiness and the expertise. The affect model also performed better. We were expecting it to perform much better than that, honestly. So we're looking more into that, and we're kind of looking at, is there too many parameters in this model? Does the addition of the parameters of the affect, is it worth it to explain the phenomena, or is it actually much more memory related? And so, two scenarios not accounted for by the model. So we're doing additional studies to see the emotional content of each of the texts. We noticed that like not all of them had the same emotional valence and arousal per text, per scenario here. There's also something else that we think is that people come with prior belief. And so the drug thing that the guy tested positive, I was like, well, yeah, that sounds very good. Like that sounds very logical. And so is there a way for us to kind of extrapolate what might be the prior belief of the participants in, for example, a specific country? So yeah, result summary, text parsing, and tailorability. So what's the best method? We had this large language model thing, and the tailorability kind of touch upon what I was saying. How do we include prior belief? Like we've conducted some experiment ourselves, and the person I think was talking to people in Australia, and there had been a fire, and there was a text about that, and like people were, they had like the opportunity to like write open text, and they were like, yeah, I thought that was true because that thing happened. And so like that could be something very interesting to include in the model, or like scan the news that people read around that time in that that specific town, and like make that our prior belief too. So connection between chunks, we had the affect, word meaning, we had similarities in some new experiment. Again, prior belief, football, like drugs and corruption. People were like, oh, that's a cover-up or something. CIA score, so that's again something Julia was saying. It's hard to fit something in the format that the architecture wants, but it's also hard to answer the way humans are answering. So we were like, well, our summaries, that's going to be open recall, but people don't say out loud everything they recall necessarily. So we're not accounting for that kind of thing. And yeah, I was rewriting kind of some connections that I made during this cognitive science summer school. Would be really interesting for that reason to be able to like kind of look at the text that Gordon had in these prompt with the LLMs and like extract mental models from that and be like, can I actually make my model answer, and can I make a better correction than the large language model, because I have a better representation of the mental model of the participant with the cognitive architecture. And also to go back to feeling of rightness and judgment of solvability last week, there's very interesting new data from Valerie that could be used there. That is task also that would be easy to feed to a cognitive architecture. So conclusion. So core affect, very practical to be able to model why and how implicit decision might lead to better decision than explicit one, and that's something we saw with the car affect thing. But also very interesting in how we can use it to co-affect to model the feeling of rightness, which is a metacognitive judgment, which is going to tell us, should I think some more about that? So that was a very practical addition to the cognitive architecture of that. Still some research gaps. I don't know why there's an R here, but so the models like social cognition. And so we tried that thing with the core affect by being like, oh, the credibility could be that core affect thing and the trustworthiness, but it's a bit more than that. And that would require something like training the model to actually trust someone or not trust someone. And I'm living in the United States right now. I wouldn't blame my participants if they weren't super trustworthy because the current health minister said something. Yeah, so how do we include that kind of thing? And then several challenges in the domain, so that methodology, the fact that we have to have kind of those artificial tasks, and we're not able to like generalize as much as to what would be in the real world. So affective and social influence, several challenge here, but I'm very happy because that means I have a job. And yeah, text processing. And so why we need modeling? Because we have those research gap, and that allows us to test some hypotheses. It's nice to have a theory like that, but sometimes you run it through the model and you're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Or something else, you have individual differences. Maybe that theory was applying to specific category of people and not another one. And it's very interesting to understand the dynamics that were underlying that. So yeah, I think that was it. Oh.
Question time. We have 8 minutes for discussion and questions, and then we'll have the second version of the poster session.
Yeah, and keep your question for the panel. If you don't forget your question, and if you don't, no, ask it. Sorry, I was like, don't forget your question if you don't get to ask it. Okay. Well.
So you mentioned it in the limitations about like generalizability with using LLMs to help label some of these like chunks. And I was just wondering if you'd speak more to how you use that. Because I noticed in the example, you had serious risks, so this was picked up as part of the chunk, but many was not picked up as part of the chunk. Those sort of intellectual, like next to a prediction. Context and next to a prediction. I was wondering if you could speak to how you sort of corrected the model. You said you did the canny annotation to correct it, or sort of what was the
so some of the correction we had to do in this one was because we didn't have the similarities between word two. So it was serious, and I can't remember what the other word was, but it was like synonyms. It wasn't connecting it, which it would have in a mental model, for example. And so what we're trying right now is first we're doing triples instead of tuples. And we were able to capture much more of the sense of the text. We have a crazy prompt now to really conserve the order of the text, because that's very important for the memory and things like that. And then we have some traditional NLP on top of that, where we just go back to the root of the word, add the similarities between words with wordvec. And what else were we doing? Similarities, and so we're able to have all those connection better now. We need to collect more data, but yeah.
I guess related to that question in your answer, have you considered trying to split apart the tasks of representing the text and then using the text for something? Like if you use maybe an encoder model for just getting vectors of the text or something, but
yeah, that's what we did actually. We did it before the large language model were really cool. So we tried different models before that. The large language model was the one that kind of worked the best for it so far. I'm also not a natural language person. So, but I did ask to other people, and they were like, nah, that's it. That's not better. So yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
I could keep my question from the family if you want.
No, go ahead.
So I govern, which is a publisher from Mars. There's a lot of auditing of IU before they release with just technical. They don't do assessment of cognitive architecture, like you present. What's your opinion on the way they should audit IU before releasing that in the way that
I'm not
about what governance? Assessments. Okay. So cognitive architectural ways, see how an I could manipulate, for example, for the game, they can manipulate it, but before releasing them, they often then actually from just a technical basic side, so they don't audit them from an exception. And it has to be integrated work in that assessment, in how you do that, into everything.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I thought, yeah. I think I haven't thought as much as you about the effect aspect. I've thought more about it being at the top, at the control aspect and the feeding aspect. So what would happen, and you actually have some work that is starting that way about putting cognitive architecture and leveraging the declarative memory and some sort of retrieval augmented generation and things like that. So I thought more about that aspect, about how could you have the cognitive model control what goes into the large language model, not so much about the effect on afterwards. But yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In the context of continuous influence effect, there had been thought that we could test it, the one and this one influence, so it would be more easier to quantify or to analyze. But in a real world setting, we are influenced by many things, by many entities, by many phenomena at the same time, in which it is so much common that it could be hard to quantify or to analyze what exact concept or what what subject and their weight in the influence one person think for that specific action at that specific time.
Yeah.
Maybe, for example, if we are in a political sense, well, we may think about our own values, but then there's also our family of agents of or neighbors and such, and what we do with each of these influences, they continuously affect us, and it would be hard to quantify what. Well, it's this amalgamate that is hard to quantify. Do you believe that?
Yeah,
it could be.
I really hope so, because I have to finish one in a month. So you're describing a DARPA program, which is called MAGIC, Methodological Advancement for Something Complex Systems. And so the task we have is to be able to do some prediction of in social context. And so the thing we picked as was, we are hopefully, if I want to survive the end of the month, we are gonna predict the sales in a specific state. I'm picking a state, but it's like all over the US. We're gonna predict the propensity that people are gonna have to buy a house. And so what we had to do was exactly like what you were saying. We had to connect it to even database that has like all the news in this specific area that people had read, that might give us information about, oh, I don't want to buy a house here because there's crime and it's dirty and somebody got shot and things like that. And so we have like those actor agents with the same model actually that I showed for the continued influence effect. And they're like each an agent, and we make them read those news, and they have a family that we extracted from the census to like create a family and make them talk to each other. We know what they vote, so approximately we can tell what type of news they read, and so what kind of opinions they might have and things like that. But exactly like you said, there's such like next step to me with the cognitive architecture is going to be the social aspect. And it is so hard to quantify that kind of thing. So I can quantify how many houses were bought, and I can tell you what is my hypothesis about why that might have been, but then it's a complex system. So every time you do a simulation, the agent might interact differently, and you have so many outputs. So really what we're doing is kind of like running those. What are the probabilities over all the simulations that we have done that this was this and that might have been the reason? But yes, that's really the next step to be able to apply that to the real world, in my opinion. Yeah.